My brother's wedding planner called. Your family canceled your invitation, but asked he wants a 100K deposit. A single phone call can unravel a lifetime of lies. When the voice on the other end isn't just canceling your invitation, but is holding a six-figure deposit hostage, you realize this is about more than a wedding. This is about a secret my family buried for decades, and the price we would all have to pay to keep it silent. If you enjoy stories that uncover the dark truths hidden behind perfect facades, then you're in the right place. Subscribe to the channel because this is one family drama you won't want to miss. My name is Eleanor Vance, and I'm 68 years old. The story I'm about to tell you is my own, a tapestry of my life woven with threads of love, betrayal, and a silence that cost us more than we ever could have imagined. It all started on a Tuesday, a day so ordinary I was measuring out coffee grounds and listening to the finches squabble at the feeder outside my kitchen window. The phone rang, slicing through the quiet morning. I answered with a cheerful, "Hello," expecting it to be my friend, Margaret, about our weekly bridge game. The voice on the other end was not Margaret's. It was a woman's voice, crisp, polished, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Am I speaking with Eleanor Vance?" "You are," I said, a faint prickle of unease brushing the back of my neck. "How can I help you?" "Ms. Vance, my name is Genevieve Thorne, of Thorne and Vine Events. I am the principal planner for the wedding of your brother, Bradford." "Bradford's wedding?" I said, my confusion genuine. "Well, yes, of course. We're all so looking forward to it." And we were. My little brother, Bradford, the eternal bachelor, had finally fallen in love. The wedding was the following month, a lavish black tie affair at the Mont Blanc estate. It was all he and Celeste could talk about. "There seems to be a misunderstanding," Genevieve Thorne continued, her tone like chipped ice. "I am calling to confirm the cancellation of your family's invitation. You and any plus ones are formally uninvited from the ceremony and reception." The world tilted. I gripped the edge of my granite countertop. "I'm sorry? There must be some mistake. Bradford, he wouldn't." "The instruction came directly from the client, Ms. Vance. Your brother, Bradford. He was quite specific." The words landed like physical blows. Uninvited. My own brother. The baby I helped raise after our mother passed. The boy I taught to tie his shoes. The man I consoled through 3 broken engagements. A cold void opened in my stomach. "Why?" was all I could whisper. "The particulars of the decision are not within my purview to discuss. However, there is the matter of the deposit." "The deposit?" I felt like a parrot, stupidly repeating her words, my mind still reeling from the disinvitation. "Yes, the initial deposit for the venue, catering, and floral arrangements was $125,000. Your brother has informed me that your family was responsible for securing this deposit. He is now requesting its immediate return." A hysterical laugh bubbled in my throat. "A deposit? He thinks I have $125,000? Genevieve, that's absurd. My husband Arthur and I are comfortable, but we are not that kind of comfortable. Bradford knows that. The documentation I have lists you, Eleanor Vance, as the guarantor for the deposit. Clause 7B stipulates in the event of a cancellation by the hosting party, which in this case is your brother and his fiancée, but initiated by your family's withdrawal of support, the deposit is forfeit unless returned by the original guarantor. Bradford is insisting. He says you promised." My blood ran cold. Promised. That one word unlocked a floodgate of memories, of a whispered conversation in our father's study years ago, a promise extracted under duress, a secret pact made to protect the family name, a promise I'd buried so deep I'd almost convinced myself I dreamed it. "He's lying," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. It was trembling. My role is not to arbitrate familial disputes. It is to execute the wishes of my client and manage the financial logistics of this event. Bradford has given me until 5 o'clock tomorrow to confirm the return of the funds. If I cannot, he has authorized me to take legal action. I strongly suggest you discuss this with him. The line going place. I stood there, the phone clutched in my hand, the dial tone a dull buzz that seemed to fill the entire house. The morning sun streaming through the window now felt harsh, exposing. I looked around my comfortable kitchen, at the photos of my children and grandchildren on the fridge, at Arthur's favorite mug drying in the rack. It all looked like a stage set, a fragile illusion of a normal life that was just beginning to crack apart. I had to call Bradford. This was all a monstrous misunderstanding, a pressure cooker moment from the wedding planning. It had to be. I dialed his number, my fingers clumsy and cold. It went straight to voicemail. "You've reached Bradford Vance. Leave a message." His voice, usually so warm and teasing, sounded like a stranger's recording. "Bradford, it's Elle. I just got the most bizarre call from your wedding planner, Genevieve. She said we're uninvited and that you're asking for some deposit. Please, honey, call me back. This isn't funny." I hung up and immediately called my other brother, Robert, the eldest, the pragmatist, the rock of the family. He answered on the second ring. "Ellie? What's up?" "Robert," I breathed. The relief at hearing his voice made me lightheaded. "Have you talked to Bradford today?"
Not since Sunday dinner. Why? You sound strange. I just got a call from his wedding planner, a woman named Genevieve Thorne. She told me, Robert, she told me our entire family is uninvited from the wedding. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Too long. "Robert, did you hear me?" "I heard you," he said, his voice low and carefully controlled. It was the voice he used when he was trying not to reveal something. "And? Did you get a call too?" Another pause. No, I didn't. The omission was a cannonball through the hull of my reality. Just me? She's only uninviting me? "Ellie," Robert said, his tone shifting into that placating big brother mode I'd always hated. "You know how Bradford gets. It's probably just cold feet. He's lashing out. He'll call you back by lunchtime and apologize." "It's not just that, Robert," I pressed, the terror rising in my chest like floodwater. She said he's demanding I return a $125,000 deposit, that I was the guarantor. Robert, what is he talking about? The silence that followed was different this time. It was thick, heavy with things unsaid. It was the silence of a shared secret, one I thought we'd all agreed to forget. "Robert?" My voice was a whisper. "What did we do?" He cleared his throat, a rough, uncomfortable sound. "Ellie, don't get hysterical. It was a long time ago. He's twisting the past to suit his narrative right now. He's under a lot of pressure with Celeste in this wedding." "What past, Robert?" I demanded, my knuckles white around the phone. "What narrative? What does this have to do with Father's study, with that promise?" "Eleanor, stop." His voice was sharp, final. "Do not go digging this up. For the sake of this family, let it lie. I'll talk to Bradford. I'll handle it." But he wouldn't handle it. I knew that now with a chilling certainty. Robert's way of handling things was to sweep them under the rug, to maintain the pristine Vance family image at any cost. And in that moment, I realized the uninvitation wasn't the wound, it was the symptom. The real disease was festering in the dark, in the shadow of a promise I should never have made, a secret that was now demanding a six-figure payment for its continued silence. And the most terrifying part was I was the only one who seemed to have forgotten the price. Robert's command to let it lie echoed in the silence he left behind. It was the same phrase our father had used, a Vance family mantra for sweeping unpleasantness under the Persian rug.
But this wasn't a spilled glass of wine. This was my brother holding a match to the threads of my life. I couldn't sit in my quiet kitchen. The walls were closing in, each framed photograph of our family a silent accusation. I grabbed my car keys, my hands trembling so badly I could barely fit the key into the ignition. I drove on autopilot, not toward Bradford's sleek downtown apartment, but to the one place I knew held answers, my father's old study, preserved like a museum exhibit in Robert's sprawling, sterile house. Robert was at work. His wife, Lydia, let me in, her face a mask of polite concern that didn't reach her eyes. "Eleanor, what a surprise. Is everything all right? You look pale." "Just need to look for an old book of fathers," I lied, my voice tight. "Robert said it would be fine." She waved a dismissive hand. "Of course, you know where it is." She didn't. She never set foot in that room, calling it a shrine to male ego. For once, I agreed with her. The study was exactly as it had been the day my father died 10 years ago. Dark oak, the scent of old leather, and faint cigar smoke trapped in the curtains. It felt cold, the heart of a long-dead man. My eyes went straight to the massive mahogany desk. The bottom left drawer was the one he'd always called his strong box, though it held no lock. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pulled it open. It was filled with the usual detritus: old fountain pens, dried-up ink pots, a monogrammed letter opener. But tucked at the very back beneath a faded portfolio of stock certificates was a simple, legal-sized manila envelope. It was unlabeled, but my name was written on it in my father's precise, sharp script. A cold dread washed over me. I slid my finger under the flap, the old glue giving way with a dry crackle. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a contract, and a smaller, folded note. The contract was between Bradford Vance and Thorn and Vine Events. And there it was, on the signature line for the guarantor, my name, Eleanor Marie Vance. It wasn't my handwriting. It was a good forgery, a very good one. But the flourish on the capital E was all wrong. I would never write it that way. But it was the folded note that stopped my breath. It was in my father's hand. Eleanor. If you are reading this, then Bradford has chosen to break his word. The promise you made in this room was not just to me, but to protect this family from a scandal that would have destroyed us. The money for the deposit was an advance against your mother's trust, the one she left for you. I instructed Bradford to use it, with your name as guarantor, to bind him to the family. To bind him to you, as the one who made his new life possible. If he is demanding its return, it means he has decided the past no longer holds him. He is forcing your hand. You must now decide if the truth is a price you are willing to pay. Your father. The room spun. My mother's trust, the one I was told had been depleted by medical bills, the one I had never questioned, because that's what good daughters do. They don't question. They let it lie. And Bradford, he knew. He knew where the money had really come from. He knew my name was on that paper without my consent. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a calculated, cruel severance. He was using the very instrument of our secret to financially break me and cut me out of his life. I stumbled out of Robert's house, the documents clutched in my hand like a live wire. I didn't go home. I drove to Bradford's building, a glass and steel monolith that reflected a perfect, cold sky. The doorman, who usually greeted me with a warm smile, gave me a stiff, formal nod. "Ms. Vance, I'll need to announce you." "He's my brother," I said, my voice cracking. "I have my instructions, ma'am." He already picked up the house phone. He spoke quietly into the receiver, then turned back to me. "I'm sorry. He's not available."
Tell him I have the envelope from Father's study. Tell him I'm not leaving until he looks me in the eye and tells me why." The doorman relayed the message. There was a long pause. Finally, he nodded. "Penthouse. He'll see you." The elevator ride was a silent, soaring ascent into a nightmare. The doors opened directly into his apartment. It was breathtakingly modern, all sharp angles and vast windows overlooking the city. And there he was, my little brother, Bradford. He stood with his back to me, his shoulders tense beneath his tailored shirt. "Bradford," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He turned slowly. His face, usually so animated and charming, was a closed door. His eyes, the same shade of hazel as mine, were cold and distant. "Eleanor, you shouldn't have come." I held up the envelope, my hand shaking. "What is this, Bradford? What have you done?" "What I had to do. What I should have done years ago. I'm cutting the poison out of my life. And you, Ellie, you're the one who handed them the bottle." "Them. Who is them?" I stepped closer, the plush white carpet muffling my steps. "What are you talking about? Our father is dead. Robert is... Robert. What poison?" "Don't," he snapped, his composure cracking for a split second. "Don't play the innocent. You stood right there, in Father's study. You heard what he said. You saw what was at stake, and you made the promise. You agreed to the lie." "The lie to protect you," I cried out, the pain finally breaking through. "We did it to protect you." "Protect me?" He let out a harsh, ugly laugh. "You didn't protect me. You buried me. You buried the truth, and you buried me with it. For years, I've lived with it. But Celeste, she deserves a clean slate. She deserves a husband who isn't contaminated by your secrets. I can't have you at the wedding, a constant reminder. I can't have any of it near me anymore." "So you disinvite me? And you try to bankrupt me for a deposit I never agreed to? For money that was mine to begin with?" "The money is the price," he said, his gaze unwavering. "The price for my silence. You want me to keep your secret, Ellie? The one you and Father and Robert forced me to carry? Then you pay for it. You pay the $125,000 and you disappear. That's the new deal." I stared at him, truly seeing him for the first time. This wasn't the boy I'd comforted. This was a stranger, hardened by a resentment I never knew festered so deep. He wasn't just running from the past, he was holding it for ransom. And I was the one who had to pay. The weight of it all, the decades of silence, crashed down on me. What terrible truth had we buried that could make my own brother look at me with such pure, unadulterated hatred? The foundation of my life wasn't just cracking, it had already collapsed, and I was only now falling through the void.
The silence in Bradford's penthouse was a physical presence, thick and suffocating. I stood there, the manila envelope feeling like a lead weight in my hand, the coldness in my brother's eyes a winter I never knew could exist. "The price for my silence," he had said. He had twisted our shared history into a weapon, and he was aiming it directly at my heart. "I don't have that kind of money, Bradford," I said, my voice hollow. "You know that. Arthur and I, we live on our pensions, our savings. This would ruin us." "Then I suggest you find it," he replied, turning back to the window, dismissing me as if I were a tiresome solicitor. "Sell the house. Take out a loan. That's not my concern. The choice is yours, Eleanor. Pay and I forget the past. Or don't, and I assure you, Celeste and every one of our society page friends will know exactly what kind of family they're marrying into." The threat was no longer veiled. It was out in the open, ugly and final. I turned and walked back to the elevator, my legs feeling like they were made of wood. The descent was a blur. I emerged onto the bustling sidewalk, the city's noise a jarring contrast to the tomb-like quiet of Bradford's apartment. I needed to find Robert. He was part of this. He knew. He had always known. I found him not at his office, but at the university library, where he sat on the board of trustees. He was in a quiet reading room, surrounded by leather-bound books, a sanctuary of order and intellect. He looked up as I entered, and the look on his face wasn't one of surprise, but of grim resignation. He closed the book he was pretending to read. "You saw him," he stated. "I saw a stranger," I corrected, my voice trembling with the fury I could no longer contain. I slid the manila envelope across the polished table. "My mother's trust, Robert. The one you told me was gone. You helped him do it. You helped him steal from me." His jaw tightened. It wasn't stealing. It was reallocating family assets for the greater good, to secure Bradford's future after the incident. "The incident?" I nearly shouted, lowering my voice to a sharp whisper as a librarian glanced our way. "What incident? What are you both so terrified of? Bradford says he's contaminated. He says we buried him. What did we bury, Robert? Tell me right now." He leaned forward, his eyes darting around the empty room. "Keep your voice down," he hissed. "This is not the place." "Then tell me where the place is," I pleaded, tears of frustration and betrayal welling in my eyes. "I am being extorted by my own brother. He is using a secret I don't even fully understand to try and destroy my life. I have a right to know what it is." He stared at me for a long moment, a war raging behind his eyes, the need for control versus the realization that the control was already lost. He let out a long, weary sigh, the sound of a man finally lowering a heavy shield. "It was a car accident," he said, his voice so low I had to strain to hear it. "A car accident? When?" 22 years ago. The summer Bradford turned 21. A cold dread trickled down my spine. I remembered that summer. Bradford had been different, withdrawn. Father had said it was a phase. "He was driving back from a party at the lake," Robert continued, his gaze fixed on the grain of the wooden table. "He had been drinking. Father had warned him, but he was young, reckless. He took a corner too fast on Old Mill Road." He paused, swallowing hard. "He wasn't alone, Ellie." The air left my lungs. "Who was with him?" "A girl, Sarah Gable." The name meant nothing to me, and yet everything. It was a name from a different world, a world we were never part of. "She was in the passenger seat," Robert continued, his voice a monotone as if reciting a horrific legal brief. "The car hit a tree. Bradford walked away with a broken arm. She didn't walk away." I felt the world tilt. "She died?" Robert gave a single grim nod. "It was ruled an accident. Excessive speed, alcohol involvement. It would have been a tragedy, but it would have been manageable. A family like ours, we could have weathered that. But there was a complication." My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "What complication?" "Sarah Gable was pregnant, Eleanor. She was 3 months pregnant." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. I sank back into my chair, my hand flying to my mouth. A life. 2 lives. The Gables, they weren't like us. They were from the wrong side of town, as Father put it. They were angry, they were grieving, and they were threatening to go to the press. They wanted to paint Bradford as a rich, reckless killer who destroyed their daughter and their grandchild. They threatened to destroy the family name, the business, everything Father had built. So Father paid them off, I whispered, the pieces clicking into a horrific mosaic. "He didn't just pay them off," Robert said, his eyes finally meeting mine, filled with a profound shame. "He buried it. He had the medical records sealed. He had the police report amended. The alcohol was minimized. The Gables were given a substantial settlement on the condition they moved away and never spoke of it again. And we were all instructed to forget it ever happened, especially you. You were a new mother yourself with little Michael. Father thought it would be
too much for you."
"And the promise I made in this study?" I asked, my voice raw. That was later, when Bradford spiraled. He wanted to confess, to ruin everything Father had done to protect him. Father gathered us. He told us the family survival depended on our silence. "You promised, Ellie. You promised to never speak of it, to help Bradford move on. And you did. You were so good to him, so kind. You never knew you were helping him bury the truth of 2 graves." I sat there, stunned into silence. The secret wasn't just a scandal. It was a death. 2 deaths. And I, in my ignorance, had been a willing participant in the cover-up. Bradford wasn't just contaminated. He was haunted. And he had been living with the knowledge that his freedom, his very place in the world, was built on a foundation of blood money and a lie I had willingly helped uphold. The weight of it was crushing, but it didn't justify this. It didn't justify the extortion, the cruelty. The question now wasn't about the past. It was about the future. Did I let him destroy me to keep a secret that was already rotting him from the inside out? Or did I finally break the promise that had poisoned us all? The silence in the library reading room was absolute, broken only by the frantic hammering of my own heart. 2 graves. Not a secret, but a burial. The polished wood of the table, the smell of old paper and lemon polish, it all felt obscene. A pristine veneer over the rot Robert had just revealed. My promise, my kindness to Bradford, hadn't been sisterly love. It had been a tool, a gentle press keeping the lid on a coffin. I looked at Robert, my eldest brother, the pillar of the family. His shoulders were slumped, the usual authority drained from his face, leaving only a weary shame. "You let me believe I was helping him," I whispered, the words scraping my throat raw. "You all used my ignorance as part of your containment strategy." "Eleanor, we were trying to protect the family," he said, but the phrase was hollow now, stripped of all meaning. "Who is family, Robert?" I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady. "You protected Father's legacy. You protected the business. You protected Bradford from consequences, but you did not protect me. You made me an accomplice to a crime I didn't know was committed." I snatched the manila envelope from the table. "And you did not protect that girl or her child." I walked out, leaving him sitting there amidst the dusty books, a monument to a fallen empire of lies. I drove, but I didn't know where to go. Home to Arthur? How could I explain this? How could I lay this darkness at the feet of our simple, good life? I found myself parked outside the county clerk's office, the engine off, staring at the granite steps. The amended police report. Robert had said the word so casually. Amended. A cold, clear purpose cut through the haze of my shock. Bradford thought he held all the power, that the threat of exposure was a leash around my neck. But he was threatening to tell a story that was already a lie. What if the truth was my weapon? I went inside, my pulse a steady, determined drum in my ears. I approached the counter, my smile feeling fragile. "I'm hoping you can help me," I said to the woman behind the desk. "I'm trying to locate an old police report for genealogical research. A car accident from about 22 years ago, Old Mill Road." She directed me to a room of public archives, a basement level filled with microfiche machines and the faint metallic smell of old technology. It took me over an hour, my eyes straining in the dim light, scrolling through reels of local news from that summer. And then I found it, a small 2-paragraph blurb in the County Chronicle. "Local woman killed in single-vehicle accident." The article named Sarah Gable, 19. It mentioned the car, a sports model, had been traveling at a high speed of rate. It stated the driver, Bradford Vance, 21, had sustained minor injuries. And then the sentence that made my blood run cold. A passenger, Miss Gable, was pronounced dead at the scene. Authorities confirmed she was pregnant at the time of the incident. It was there, in print. It had never been a complete secret. It had just been forgotten, swept aside by my father's influence and the passage of time. I made a copy, the machine whirring and flashing, making the truth tangible. This was the leverage I didn't know I had. Bradford was threatening to tell a sanitized version of his own crime. I had proof of the unvarnished reality. My phone buzzed in my purse. It was Arthur. I let it go to voicemail, a fresh wave of guilt washing over me. I couldn't talk to him yet. I needed to see one more thing. The city cemetery was on the outskirts of town, a rolling, peaceful hill. It took me another hour walking through rows of headstones before I found it. A simple, modest, granite marker. Sarah Ann Gable, beloved daughter, too soon taken. There were no dates for an infant, just a small, etched dove at the bottom of the stone. I stood there, the sun warm on my back, and finally the tears came. Not for myself, not for Bradford, but for this young woman I never knew, for the life that was never lived, for the silence that had been bought and paid for. "I'm sorry," I whispered to the quiet stone. I didn't know. When I got back to my car, I listened to Arthur's voicemail. "Ellie, everything okay? You sounded strange this morning. Call me, sweetheart." I called him back. "Arthur," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "I need you to come home. There's something I have to tell you. It's about my family. It's bad." He was silent for a moment. "I'm on my way," he said. No questions asked. That was Arthur, my rock. I was waiting for him on our front porch when his car pulled into the driveway. He got out, his kind, familiar face etched with concern. He sat down beside me on the steps, taking my hand in his. "Talk to me, Ellie." And I did. I told him everything. The disinvitation, the deposit, the secret in my father's study, the accident, Sarah Gable, the baby. I showed him the news article. I watched the shock and horror dawn on his face, but it was quickly replaced by a fierce, protective anger. "That bastard," he muttered, his grip on my hand tightening. "All of them. They did this to you? To that poor girl?" He shook his head, his jaw set. "What do you want to do, Ellie? Whatever it is, I'm with you." I looked at my husband, at the unwavering support in his eyes, and I knew what I had to do. The time for being a good daughter, a compliant sister, was over. "I'm not paying him a dime," I said, my voice clear and strong for the first time in days. "And I'm not going to be silent anymore." I picked up my phone. I didn't call Bradford. I called his wedding planner. "Genevieve Thorne," the crisp voice answered. "I'm not paying him a dime," I said, my voice clear and strong for the first time in days. "And I'm not going to be silent anymore." I picked up my phone. I didn't call Bradford. I called his wedding planner. "Genevieve Thorne," the crisp voice answered. "Genevieve, it's Eleanor Vance. I have a message for my brother. Tell him the deal is off. I am not paying the deposit. Furthermore, tell him that if he so much as whispers a distorted version of his past to anyone, I will release the full, unedited truth to the press, complete with the original news article detailing the death of Sarah Gable and her unborn child. His choice is no longer mine to make. It's his. He can have his clean slate, but he will not build it on my ruin." I hung up. The silence on the porch was profound. The battle lines were drawn. The secret was out of its grave, and I was no longer afraid of it. I was ready to wield it. The question was, what would my brother do when he realized the person he was trying to blackmail now held the power to destroy everything he was trying to become? The silence after I hung up was different from before. It wasn't heavy with dread, but charged with a quiet, terrifying resolve. Arthur looked at me, his eyes wide, not with fear, but with a kind of awe. "My God, Eleanor," he breathed, "you just declared war." "I just refuse to be his victim anymore,"
I corrected, though my hands were trembling. I had thrown a grenade into the carefully constructed world of the Vance family, and now we were all waiting for the explosion. It didn't take long. My phone rang 15 minutes later. It wasn't Bradford, it was Robert. His voice was a low, furious roar, a stark contrast to his usual controlled tone. "What in God's name have you done, Eleanor? Bradford just called me. He's hysterical. He said you threatened him." "I informed him of the consequences of his actions, Robert," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I am not paying him, and I will not be silenced by a version of the truth that suits him." "You have no idea what you're playing with," he snarled. "This isn't just about Bradford. This is about the family name, the business, my position on the board. You'll drag us all through the mud." "A young woman is dead, Robert," I shot back, my own anger finally breaking free. "A child is dead, and you're worried about your position on a board? The mud is where this belongs. It's where you buried it. Maybe it's time it saw the light." He hung up on me. The next call came an hour later. Private number. I knew it was him. "Hello, Bradford," I answered, my heart a cold, hard stone in my chest. His voice was choked, raw with the panic I had never heard before. "You can't do this, Ellie. You can't. I gave you no choice. Celeste, if she finds out the real story, she'll leave me. Everything will be over." "And that is my problem, how?" I asked, the words feeling foreign and cruel on my tongue, but necessary. "I just refuse to be his victim anymore," I corrected, though my hands were trembling. I had thrown a grenade into the carefully constructed world of the Vance family, and now we were all waiting for the explosion. "So, what do you want?" he finally whispered, the fight gone from his voice, replaced with a desperate plea. "I want you to call Genevieve Thorne. You will tell her the deposit demand was a mistake. You will reinstate my invitation to the wedding, and you will sit down with me and Arthur, and you will tell me everything. No more lies. No more half-truths. You will look me in the eye, and you will tell me the whole story of what happened that night on Old Mill Road. Then, and only then, will we discuss what happens next." The silence stretched out so long, I thought the line had gone dead. "And if I do," he said, his voice barely audible, you won't tell anyone?" "I will do what is right, Bradford, but I will not be motivated by malice or revenge. You have my word on that, for what little it's worth to you now." He agreed, just like that. The bluster, the cruelty, the coldness, it all crumbled when faced with the prospect of losing the future he had built on the graves of the past. The bully, I realized, was terrified of his own shadow. The meeting was set for 2 days later, at my house. Bradford arrived alone, looking haggard and years older. He sat on our living room sofa, across from Arthur and me, unable to meet our eyes. He looked small in his expensive clothes, a boy drowning in a man's suit. "Start at the beginning, Bradford," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "The real beginning." And he did. He told us about the party at the lake, the drinking, the fight he'd had with Sarah. She had just told him she was pregnant. He was scared, angry. He told her he wasn't ready, that it would ruin his plans, his life. They argued. He got in the car, drunk and furious. She got in beside him. "I was driving too fast," he whispered, staring at his hands. "I remember her screaming at me to slow down. And then the tree. It was just there." He finally looked up at me, his eyes swimming with tears. "I killed them both. I killed them both." He broke down then, sobbing into his hands, the weight of 2 decades of guilt finally crushing him. Arthur and I sat in silence, letting the horror of his confession fill the room. It was one thing to know the facts. It was another to hear the agony in his voice. After a long while, he composed himself,
wiping his face with a trembling hand. Father showed up before the police. He handled everything. He made it all go away. He told me it was for the best, that it was the only way. And I was so grateful. For years I was grateful. But then the gratitude turned to shame, and the shame turned to this poison. Every time I saw you, Ellie, with your perfect, happy family, it was a reminder of what I destroyed. I hated you for your innocence. I hated that you got to live a clean life while I was rotting inside. So that was it, the root of his hatred. My happiness was his punishment. "What do you want to do now, Bradford?" I asked softly. "I don't know," he cried. "I just know I can't marry Celeste with this between us. I can't."
The doorbell rang, sharp and insistent. We all froze. Arthur went to answer it. A moment later, he returned to the living room, his face pale. Behind him was Genevieve Thorne, her expression unreadable, and beside her a woman with red-rimmed eyes and a face I had only seen in a newspaper clipping. An older, grief-hardened version of Sarah Gable. It was her mother. "I'm sorry for the intrusion, Miss Vance," Genevieve said, her voice cutting through the tense silence. "But after your call, I felt a moral obligation. I did some digging of my own, and I found Mrs. Gable." The past wasn't just walking in the door. It was staring us all in the face, and it demanded to be heard. The air in my living room, already thick with confession, turned to solid ice. Time seemed to fracture. I saw my brother's face drain of all color, his body going rigid with a terror so profound. It was like watching a man have a heart attack in slow motion. His eyes were locked on the woman standing beside Genevieve Thorne. This wasn't the ghost of a girl from a story. This was her living, breathing mother, her grief etched into the lines around her mouth and the fierce, burning pain in her eyes. "My name is Carol Gable," she said, her voice low and rough like stones grinding together. She ignored Robert, ignored Arthur. Her gaze was fixed on Bradford. "You look like your pictures, the ones in the paper, from before." Bradford made a small, choked sound in the back of his throat. He was shrinking into my sofa, trying to disappear. Genevieve Thorne stood with a posture of grim finality. "Miss Vance," she said, addressing me, "your call was unorthodox. It prompted me to review my client files and the provenance of the deposit. The trail was murky, to say the least. A little more digging led me to the amended police report, and from there it wasn't difficult to find Mrs. Gable. She never changed her name." Carol Gable took a step forward, her hands clenched at her sides. "All these years," she said, her voice trembling with the effort to control it, "we took your father's money. We were poor, we were grieving, we were broken. We thought it was the only way to survive. But the silence has been a cancer. I lost my daughter, I lost my grandchild, and you people, you just went on with your lives." Her eyes swept over the room, taking in the comfortable furniture, the family photos, the evidence of a life uninterrupted. The hatred in her gaze was pure and justified. "It wasn't like that," Bradford whispered, but the words were a pathetic, hollow plea. "Wasn't it?" Coral snapped, her composure breaking. "My Sarah is still dead. Your name is still on the society page. Tell me how it wasn't like that." Arthur, my steady, quiet Arthur, finally found his voice. "Mrs. Gable," he said, moving to stand beside me, a pillar of solidarity. "Please, sit down. We were just hearing the truth for the first time." Carol Gable's eyes flickered to me, and for a moment I saw a flicker of surprise, as if she hadn't expected to find an ally in the sister. "The truth?" she repeated, a bitter, broken laugh escaping her. "You want the truth?"
The truth is that your father paid off the right people. The truth is that the original report said his blood alcohol level was twice the legal limit. The truth is that a witness saw him speeding through a stop sign a mile before the crash. That was all amended. The truth is that my daughter loved him, and he killed her and their baby because he was a drunk, reckless boy who knew his daddy would clean up his mess. Each word was a lash, stripping away the last of Bradford's defenses. He was openly sobbing now, his face buried in his hands. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Sorry doesn't put flowers on a grave," Carol said, her voice dropping back to that deadly calm. "Sorry doesn't give me back the last 22 years. She turned to Genevieve. "You said there was money, a deposit." Genevieve nodded, her professional mask firmly back in place, though I could see a flicker of disgust in her eyes. $125,000. Mr. Vance was attempting to reclaim it from his sister. Carol Gable looked at me, a long, appraising look. "And you? What were you going to do with this truth?" I stood up, meeting her gaze. My heart was breaking for her, for the unimaginable loss, and for the twisted wreckage of my own family. I wasn't going to pay him, and I wasn't going to let him use this secret to hurt anyone ever again. I was going to make him face it. A tense silence filled the room. The power had shifted irrevocably. This was no longer a family dispute. It was a reckoning. Carol Gable nodded slowly, as if coming to a decision. She announced, "Then here is what is going to happen. That money. It was my daughter's blood money, twice over. It belongs to me. You will sign it over to me, Bradford Vance. Every last cent." Bradford looked up, his eyes wide with a fresh terror. "The wedding, the venue."
"Your wedding is the least of your concerns," Carol Gable said, her voice like iron. "You will also make a public donation in Sarah's name to a charity for grieving parents, a substantial one. And you will come to her grave. You will look at her headstone and you will say her name out loud. You will apologize to her." It was a sentence, a penance. "And if I don't?" Bradford asked, a last, feeble spark of defiance. Carol Gable smiled then, a terrible, cold smile. "Then I will go to every newspaper, every television station, with the original police report, the witness statement I kept all these years, and the story of how the Vance family bought their way out of a double manslaughter charge. Your perfect Celeste will know exactly who she almost married. Your world will burn to the ground. The choice is yours." There was no choice. We all knew it. Bradford, broken and defeated, gave a single, shuddering nod. Genevieve Thorne cleared her throat. "I will draw up the paperwork for the transfer of funds immediately. And as for the wedding of Bradford Vance and Celeste Abernathy," she said, her tone making it clear she had already made her own judgment, "Thorne and Vine will be terminating our contract, effective immediately." She turned and left, her heels clicking a final, disapproving note on my hardwood floor. Carol Gable stood for a moment longer, her eyes taking in the scene of our family's utter collapse. She didn't look triumphant, she just looked tired. Then, without another word, she followed Genevieve out, leaving the three of us in the devastating quiet. The secret was out, the price had been set, and as I looked at my broken brother, I knew the wedding was the very last thing that had been canceled. It was our entire lives, our family's legacy, that had just been officially terminated. The fallout was only just beginning. The front door clicked shut, a sound of such profound finality that it seemed to echo in the silence for a full minute after Carol Gable and Genevieve Thorne had left. The three of us sat frozen in the wreckage of the life we had known. Bradford was a shell, slumped forward on the sofa, his entire body trembling with silent, wretched sobs. Arthur had his arm around me, his grip tight, as if he were holding me together. I felt numb, the adrenaline of the confrontation seeping away, leaving a cold, hollow exhaustion in its wake. Bradford was the first to speak, his voice a shredded ruin. "She's gone. Celeste, she's gone. She'll know everything now. It's over." "Maybe it doesn't have to be," I found myself saying, the words surprising me as much as them. Both men looked at me. "Maybe it shouldn't be a secret anymore, Bradford. Maybe the only way to ever be free of this is to stop hiding." He stared at me, his eyes wide with horror. "You can't be serious. A public donation? Going to the grave? That woman will destroy me anyway." "No," I said, a strange calm settling over me. "She won't. Not if you do what she asks. Not if you face it. But you have to do it for real. Not as another transaction. Not as another price to pay." I looked at my brother, truly looked at him. Not as the monster he had become, but as the terrified boy he still was. "You have to tell Celeste yourself." The color drained from his face completely. "I can't." "You have to," Arthur said, his voice firm and quiet. "Eleanor's right, son. You can't build a marriage on this. It will poison everything, just like it poisoned you." The next 48 hours were a strange, suspended agony. Bradford stayed in our guest room, a ghost wandering the halls of my home. He didn't speak, he barely ate. He was a man waiting for the gallows. Robert called incessantly, but I refused his calls. This was no longer his to manage. The paperwork from Genevieve arrived by courier. Bradford signed the document transferring the entire $125,000 deposit to Carol Gable without a word, his hand shaking so badly his signature was a child's scrawl. The money, my mother's money, was gone. It felt right, in a way. It was never meant to be mine. The day of the reckoning arrived, overcast and gray. Bradford, Arthur, and I drove to the cemetery in a silence that was heavier than any conversation. Carol Gable was already there, standing before her daughter's grave. She didn't look at us as we approached. Bradford stopped a few feet from the headstone, his breath catching. He looked like he might be sick. I gave him a gentle nudge forward. He took one step, then another, until he was standing beside Carol, facing the granite marker. He stared at it for a long, long time. The silence was only broken by the rustle of leaves in a distant tree. "Sarah," he whispered, the name a prayer and a curse on his lips. His voice broke. He cleared his throat, forcing the words out. "Sarah Ann Gable, I am so sorry. For everything. For the fight, for the drinking, for driving that car, for taking your life and the life of our child." A sob racked his body, but he didn't turn away. "I have lived with the shame every day. I have been a coward. I let my father hide what I did. I am so sorry I didn't have the courage to be the man you deserved." The night they left, Bradford lingered at the door while Celeste went ahead to the car. He turned to me, his hands shoved in his pockets. "I don't think I ever properly thanked you, Ellie. For everything. For not giving up on me, even when I was trying my hardest to make you." "You're my brother," I said simply. He nodded, his eyes glistening. "I'm gonna try to be a better one." He leaned in and kissed my cheek, a gesture so tender and unfamiliar it nearly broke my heart. "I love you. I love you too, Bradford." I stood on the porch with Arthur, watching their car disappear down the street. The chapter was closing. The family I had known was gone, shattered and reassembled into something new and unfamiliar.
There was grief in that, but there was also a profound sense of release. The secret was no longer a chain around our necks. It was a story, a tragic, painful story, but one that had finally been told. And in the telling, we had found our way, through the wreckage, back to each other. The lights in our home glowed warm against the encroaching dusk, a quiet testament to a peace that had been hard-won and was all the more precious for it.
"Don't," she said, holding up a hand. "Don't you dare lie to me now. Is it true?" He looked at her, at the woman he loved, and I saw the war in his eyes, the old instinct to lie, to manipulate, to preserve the illusion, and the new, fragile hope for a real life. He took a deep, shuddering breath. "Yes," he said, the word simple and devastating. "It's all true." He didn't offer excuses. He didn't blame our father. He just stood there and let the truth hang in the air between them. Celeste stared at him, her chest heaving. Then she did something I will never forget. She didn't slap him. She didn't scream. She walked over to him, her steps slow and deliberate, and she simply asked, "Why didn't you tell me?" It was the question that held the ghost of a future. Bradford had no answer. He just crumpled, falling to his knees before her, his face pressed against her stomach as he wept. She stood there, her hands hovering over his head for a moment before she slowly, gently rested them in his hair. The wedding was over. The life they had planned was ashes. But as I watched them, I saw that something new, something painfully honest, was being born from the wreckage. It wasn't a happy ending. It was something more real, a beginning. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could finally breathe. The secret was no longer mine to carry. It was his to bear. And perhaps someday, with her help, to overcome. Our family was broken, but in the cracks, the light was finally getting in. 6 months. That's how long it took for the dust to settle, for the quiet to become something other than the aftermath of an explosion. The grand wedding at the Mont Blanc estate was, of course, cancelled. The society pages buzzed with whispers of cold feet and irreconcilable differences, but the truth, for once, remained a private, painful matter. Bradford and Celeste did not have a storybook ending. They had something more difficult and more real. They moved into a small, unassuming apartment across town. Celeste took a leave from her profile gallery job. Bradford, for the first time in his life, started seeing a therapist twice a week. He was learning to build a life that wasn't a monument to his father's expectations or a fortress against his own past. Arthur and I settled back into our rhythm, but the fabric of our lives had been permanently altered. The silence in our home was no longer just peaceful. It was earned. We had faced a monster and found we were stronger than we knew. Robert, predictably, had retreated into a fortress of his own making. He barely spoke to me, his anger a cold, distant star. The Vance family name, his sacred charge, had been tarnished not by scandal but by truth, and he could not forgive me for that. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when the letter arrived. Thick, cream-colored paper with a return address I didn't recognize. My heart gave a little lurch of residual anxiety, a ghost of the fear I'd lived for those terrible weeks. I opened it carefully. Inside was a short, handwritten note and a cashier's check. The note was from Carol Gable. "Miss Vance, the money has been used to pay off the mortgage on my home. For the first time since I lost Sarah, the roof over my head is truly my own. It doesn't bring her back. Nothing ever will. But it has given me a kind of peace I haven't known in 22 years. I saw what you did for your brother. You didn't have to. You could have let him drown in the mess he made. I won't say I forgive him. That is a journey I am still on. but I wanted you to know that your courage did not go unnoticed. I am enclosing the remainder of the funds. It is not a sum I wish to keep. Use it for something good. Carol Gable. I looked at the check. It was for $25,000. The remainder. She had kept exactly what she needed and sent the rest back. It was an act of stunning, principled grace that left me breathless. I showed the letter to Arthur that evening. He read it in silence, then folded it carefully and handed it back to me. "What will you do with it?" he asked. I knew immediately there was only one thing to do. We're going to start a scholarship at the community college for young, single mothers in Sarah Gable's name. Arthur's smile was the warmest thing I had felt all day. "That's perfect, Ellie," he said. The following week, I called Bradford and told him about the letter and our plan. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Okay," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Okay. Thank you, Ellie." A few days later, he asked if he and Celeste could come over for dinner. It was the first time they had been to our home since the confrontation. When they arrived, they brought a bottle of wine and a quiet, tentative warmth. Celeste hugged me at the door. A real hug, not a social nicety. "Thank you for giving him back to me," she whispered in my ear. Or maybe for giving me the real him for the first time. Dinner was not a festive affair. It was subdued, thoughtful. We talked about ordinary things, the new bakery that had opened downtown, the book Celeste was reading. It was healing, this mundane talk. After dessert, Rodford cleared his throat. "Celeste and I are thinking of leaving. Not far, just a few states over. A fresh start, where the name Vance doesn't come with so much baggage." I felt a pang of loss, sharp and immediate. But I looked at my brother, at the new light in his eyes, the lack of the old frantic desperation, and I knew it was the right thing. I said, "I think that's a wonderful idea," and I meant it. The night they left, Bradford lingered at the door while Celeste went ahead to the car. He turned to me, his hands shoved in his pockets. "I don't think I ever properly thanked you, Ellie, for everything. For not giving up on me, even when I was trying my hardest to make you." "You're my brother," I said simply. He nodded, his eyes glistening. "I'm gonna try to be a better one." He leaned in and kissed my cheek, a gesture so tender and unfamiliar it nearly broke my heart. "I love you." "I love you too, Bradford." I stood on the porch with Arthur, watching their car disappear down the street. The chapter was closing. The family I had known was gone, shattered and reassembled into something new and unfamiliar. There was grief in that, but there was also a profound sense of release. The secret was no longer a chain around our necks. It was a story, a tragic, painful story, but one that had finally been told. And in the telling, we had found our way, through the wreckage, back to each other. The lights in our home glowed warm against the encroaching dusk, a quiet testament to a peace that had been hard-won and was all the more precious for it. The house felt different after Bradford and Celeste left. The silence was no longer charged with the ghosts of unsaid things. It was a peaceful, spacious quiet, filled with the soft, ordinary sounds of our life. The tick of the grandfather clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant whistle of a train. Arthur and I had settled into a new, deeper rhythm, our bond fortified by the storm we had weathered together. The Sarah Gable Memorial Scholarship was established, and the first recipient, a bright, determined young woman named Maria, had sent a heartfelt thank you note that now lived on our refrigerator. A circle had been closed. A debt of pain had been, if not repaid, at least transformed into something that could foster hope. I thought that was the end of it. I believed the final page of our family's turbulent story had been turned. I was wrong. It arrived on a Tuesday, just like the first phone call from Genevieve Thorne had. This time it was a formal, legal envelope from the offices of Holloway and Sons, attorneys at law. My first, weary thought was of Robert. Had he found some way to contest Father's will, to punish me for my defiance? With a sigh, I slit the envelope open. It was not from Robert. The letter was brief and to the point. My father's oldest friend and lawyer, Charles Holloway, was retiring and closing his practice. In the process of archiving decades of files, a specific item designated for me had been found. Mr. Holloway requested my presence at his office at my earliest convenience to receive it. A specific item, designated for me. The calm I had so carefully cultivated over the past months trembled. What now? What other piece of the past was waiting to ambush me? Arthur, ever my anchor, offered to come with me, but I declined. This was something I needed to face alone. Charles Holloway's office was a time capsule, all dark wood and green leather, smelling of old books and pipe tobacco. He was a kind, elderly man, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he greeted me. "Eleanor, you look well." "Thank you, Charles. You said you found something for me?" His smile faded into a more somber expression. "Yes, your father was a complicated man. He gave me this just a week before he passed. He instructed me to hold it until after Bradford was married." He let out a soft, sad chuckle. "I suppose, given the circumstances, the condition has been met by other means." He unlocked a drawer in his massive desk and retrieved a small, sturdy lockbox, the kind used for important documents. He placed it on the desk between us. He was very specific. "This is for your eyes only." My throat went dry. I took the box. It was heavier than it looked. "Thank you, Charles." I drove home with the box on the passenger seat, a silent, ominous passenger. I didn't open it in the car. I carried it into my kitchen, placing it on the same counter where I'd received that fateful phone call. I poured myself a glass of water, my hand steady, but my heart was a frantic bird against my ribs. Your eyes only. I found the small key taped to the bottom of the box. With a deep breath, I inserted it and turned the lock. The lid opened with a soft click. Inside, there were no more legal contracts, no forgeries. There were memories. On top lay a faded, ribbon-bound stack of letters. I recognized the stationery instantly. It was my mother's. I untied the ribbon with trembling fingers. The letters were not to my father. They were to her sister, my Aunt Clara. And as I began to read, the floor of my understanding fell away once more. "William is so cold since the incident with the Porter account. He talks of nothing but legacy, of building an empire for the boys. He barely looks at Eleanor. He says a daughter cannot carry the Vance name forward. My heart breaks for her." Another, "He has moved all of my assets into a trust I cannot access. He says it is for the good of the family, to protect us. It feels like a prison." And the final, most devastating one, dated just a month before she died. "Clara, I am so tired. The doctors don't know what's wrong. I feel a chill in my bones that never leaves. William has already drawn up the papers for the trust for the children. He has shown me. He has left Eleanor a pittance, Clara, a token. He says she will marry, that it will be her husband's concern to provide for her. The bulk of everything, my own inheritance included, is for the boys. I feel I have failed her. I am too weak to fight him." I let the letters fall from my hands, scattering on the counter like fallen leaves. The final piece of the puzzle, the one I never knew was missing, snapped into place. My mother's trust, it wasn't just depleted by medical bills. It had been systematically stripped from her, and from me, by my father. The money he'd used to pay off the Gables, the money he'd funneled to Bradford, it was hers. It was meant to be mine. And then I saw it, lying at the bottom of the box, A single, sealed envelope, my name written in my father's hand once more. This script was shakier, the hand of a dying man. I tore it open. Eleanor, if you are reading this, then you know. You know that I used your mother's love for her children to build my legacy, and in doing so, I broke her heart and stole your birthright. I justified it as the necessary cruelty of a patriarch. I was wrong. The incident with Bradford was not the first sin. It was merely the repetition of a pattern I had already established. The sacrifice of a daughter for the sake of the sons. I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. I only ask that you understand the depth of my failure. I saw your strength, your goodness, and I was afraid of it. It was a mirror held up to my own deficiencies. I made you a party to a terrible secret, not to bind Bradford to the family, but to bind you to its silence, to give you a stake in the lie. The money Bradford demanded was the last of it. The final piece of your mother's legacy, spent to cover a sin that mirrored my own. The irony is not lost on me even at death's door. You were always the strongest of them all, Eleanor. Forgive an old fool for being too proud and too cowardly to ever tell you so while he lived. Your father. I sank into a kitchen chair, the letter fluttering from my grasp. There was no anger left, only a vast, bottomless sorrow. The invitation, the deposit, Bradford's cruelty, it had all been a grotesque echo of my father's original sin. He had taught his sons, by brutal example, that the women in their lives were instruments to be used, assets to be managed, and sacrifices to be made for the vaunted family name. I looked out the window at the backyard where my mother had loved to tend her roses. I thought of her, not as the faint, smiling portrait in Robert's house, but as the woman in those letters, heartbroken, isolated, and slowly being extinguished. I thought of Sarah Gable, and I thought of myself. The story wasn't about a canceled wedding or a lost deposit. It was about a poison that had been passed down, a legacy of misogyny and silence. But as I sat there, in the quiet of the home I had built with Arthur, a home built on mutual respect and love, I realized something. The chain had been broken. My father's final, posthumous confession was not a weapon. It was an absolution. It was the final piece of evidence I needed to fully release myself from the narrative he had written for me. I had spent my life believing I was a supporting character in the Vance family drama. I now knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I had always been the hero. And my story, from this moment on, was entirely my own to write. The finality of my father's letter did not bring a storm of tears or a surge of rage. Instead, it brought a quiet, profound stillness. It was the calm at the eye of the hurricane, a moment of absolute clarity after a lifetime of swirling confusion. The last, missing piece of the puzzle had been placed, and the picture it revealed was both terrible and liberating. I was not a victim of circumstance. I was the heir to a legacy of quiet oppression, but I was also its terminus. The poison stopped with me. I did not call Robert. What would be the point? He was my father's true son, a guardian of the empty vault. To tell him would be to watch him perform mental gymnastics to justify our father's actions, to once again let it lie. I did not call Bradford. His own healing was too fragile, his understanding of our family's sickness still too nascent. This truth was mine to carry, a burden that, paradoxically, felt weightless. I showed the letters and the final confession to Arthur. He read them in our living room,
the same room where our world had fractured months before. When he finished, he set the papers down carefully as if they were ancient parchment and came to sit beside me, taking my hands in his. "My God, Ellie," he whispered, his eyes full of a pain for me that I could no longer feel for myself. "All this time?" "All this time," I finished for him, my voice steady. "But it's over now. Truly over." The next day, I drove back to the cemetery, but this time I did not go to Sarah Gable's grave. I went to my mother's. Her plot was grander, of course, a large polished marble stone next to my father's. Margaret Ann Vance, beloved wife and mother. The epitaph was a masterpiece of his fiction. I knelt on the grass, the dew seeping through the knees of my slacks. I placed a single white rose against the cold stone. "I know, Mom," I said softly to the silent granite. "I read your letters. I know how tired you were. I know how your heart broke for me." A breeze rustled the leaves of the old oak tree shading the plot, and I took it as a sign. "I'm sorry he did that to you. I'm sorry I never knew. But I want you to know that the chain is broken. Your legacy wasn't the money he stole. Your legacy is me. And I am strong. I am good. And I am free." I stayed there for a long time, not mourning, but communing. I was introducing the woman I had become to the woman she had been, a connection that had been severed by my father, finally restored. Weeks turned into a season. Life moved on in its gentle, ordinary way. Then one evening, my phone rang. It was Bradford. His voice was different, clearer, without the undercurrent of frantic energy that had always been there. "Ellie," he said, "I'm in town for a day. Can I come by?" He arrived just after sunset. He looked healthier, his face no longer holding that pinched, anxious look. We sat on the porch swing, the way we had as children, watching the fireflies blink in the gathering dusk. The therapy is forcing me to look at things, not just the accident, everything. The way Dad was, the way he pitted Robert and me against each other, the way he treated you. I stayed silent, letting him find the words. He made me feel like I was the center of the universe, but it was a poison center. Every privilege came with a string attached, a reminder of a debt I could never repay. The accident, it was the ultimate debt. And he made you a co-signer on it without your consent. I've been so angry at you for so long, but my anger was misplaced. I should have been angry at him. He set us all up to fail. I reached over and took his hand. It was warm and steady. "He did, Bradford, but we don't have to live in his setup anymore." He nodded, squeezing my hand. "I know. Celeste and I are talking about starting a family." He said it with a mix of terror and wonder. "And I'm terrified, Ellie, terrified that I'll be like him." "The fact that you're terrified," I said gently, "is the surest sign that you won't be." The finality of my father's letter did not bring a storm of tears or a surge of rage. Instead, it brought a quiet, profound stillness. It was the calm at the eye of the hurricane, a moment of absolute clarity after a lifetime of swirling confusion. The last, missing piece of the puzzle had been placed, and the picture it revealed was both terrible and liberating. I was not a victim of circumstance. I was the heir to a legacy of quiet oppression, but I was also its terminus. The poison stopped with me. I did not call Robert. What would be the point? He was my father's true son, a guardian of the empty vault. To tell him would be to watch him perform mental gymnastics to justify our father's actions, to once again let it lie. I did not call Bradford. His own healing was too fragile. his understanding of our family's sickness still too nascent. This truth was mine to carry, a burden that, paradoxically, felt weightless. I showed the letters and the final confession to Arthur. He read them in our living room, the same room where our world had fractured months before. When he finished, he set the papers down carefully as if they were ancient parchment and came to sit beside me, taking my hands in his. "My God, Ellie," he whispered, his eyes full of a pain for me that I could no longer feel for myself. "All this time?" "All this time," I finished for him, my voice steady. "But it's over now. Truly over." The next day, I drove back to the cemetery, but this time I did not go to Sarah Gable's grave. I went to my mother's. Her plot was grander, of course, a large polished marble stone next to my father's. Margaret Ann Vance, beloved wife and mother. The epitaph was a masterpiece of his fiction. I knelt on the grass, the dew seeping through the knees of my slacks. I placed a single white rose against the cold stone. "I know, Mom," I said softly to the silent granite. "I read your letters. I know how tired you were. I know how your heart broke for me." A breeze rustled the leaves of the old oak tree shading the plot, and I took it as a sign. "I'm sorry he did that to you. I'm sorry I never knew. But I want you to know that the chain is broken. Your legacy wasn't the money he stole. Your legacy is me. And I am strong. I am good. And I am free." I stayed there for a long time, not mourning, but communing. I was introducing the woman I had become to the woman she had been, a connection that had been severed by my father, finally restored. Weeks turned into a season. Life moved on in its gentle, ordinary way. Then one evening, my phone rang. It was Bradford. His voice was different, clearer, without the undercurrent of frantic energy that had always been there. "Ellie," he said, "I'm in town for a day. Can I come by?" He arrived just after sunset. He looked healthier, his face no longer holding that pinched, anxious look. We sat on the porch swing, the way we had as children, watching the fireflies blink in the gathering dusk. The therapy is forcing me to look at things, not just the accident. Everything. The way Dad was, the way he pitted Robert and me against each other, the way he treated you. I stayed silent, letting him find the words. He made me feel like I was the center of the universe, but it was a poison center. Every privilege came with a string attached, a reminder of a debt I could never repay. The accident, it was the ultimate debt. And he made you a co-signer on it without your consent. I've been so angry at you for so long, but my anger was misplaced. I should have been angry at him. He set us all up to fail. I reached over and took his hand. It was warm and steady. "He did, Bradford, but we don't have to live in his setup anymore." He nodded, squeezing my hand. "I know. Celeste and I are talking about starting a family." He said it with a mix of terror and wonder. "And I'm terrified, Ellie. Terrified that I'll be like him." "The fact that you're terrified," I said gently, "is the surest sign that you won't be." The Vance name would not be carried forward as a banner of power and prestige. In Bradford's future child, it would be a name offered with humility and hope. In my own line, through my children and grandchildren, it was a name that had been cleansed by honesty. The family was smaller, quieter, and scarred, but it was real. And in the end, after a lifetime of lies, real was the only thing that mattered. I looked up at the first stars piercing the twilight sky, and for the first time in 68 years, I felt no shadow from the past. only the limitless possibility of the peace I had fought so hard to win. My breath caught in my throat. The box was my mother's. I had forgotten it existed, a relic from when we cleared her bedroom after the funeral. I'd been too grief-stricken to open it then, and in the decades since, it had been buried by the weight of more recent tragedies. "Let me see that, sweetheart," I said, my voice a little too tight. Sarah, perceptive as always, handed it over, her eyes wide with curiosity. I untied the brittle lace, the fibers snapping in my hands. The lid lifted with a groan, releasing a scent of faded roses and old paper. On top lay a christening gown, yellowed with age. Beneath it, a stack of envelopes tied with a ribbon, and beneath those, a small, leather-bound journal. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had read my mother's letters to her sister, but this was private. This was for her alone. "Grandma, are you okay?" Sarah asked, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. I could only nod, my fingers tracing the embossed cover of the journal. I opened it. The script was my mother's, but looser, more frantic than in her letters. October 12th. William found out about the money I gave to Clara. The fury in his eyes. I have never been more afraid. He said I had betrayed the family, that I was stealing from our children's future. He doesn't understand. It was my money, from my father. He has taken control of everything now. I am a prisoner in this beautiful house. I flipped a few pages, my blood running cold. March 3rd. He told me today. A precaution, he called it. He has had the children's paternity tested. He said a man in his position must be certain of his legacy. The humiliation, the sheer violation. I looked at my beautiful boys, at my Eleanor, and I felt filthy. He has the results locked in his study. He would not tell me what they are. He just smiled that cold, triumphant smile of his. The world tilted. Paternity tests? My father had doubted we were even his? The foundation of my entire history, the very bedrock of the Vance name, was not just cracked, it was a deliberate, cruel fabrication. "Grandma, you're shaking," Sarah said, her voice filled with alarm. "What is it?" I couldn't speak. I could only point a trembling finger at the passage. Sarah took the journal, her eyes scanning the words. I watched as her face, so open and trusting, transformed. I saw the confusion, then the dawning horror, and finally a flash of the same righteous anger that had once fueled me. This is unbelievable," she whispered. "Great-grandfather did this? He questioned his own children?" She looked up at me, her eyes blazing. "This changes everything. This proves it was never about protecting the family. It was about his ego, his control." She stood up, clutching the journal to her chest. "People need to know this. This isn't just our family secret anymore, Grandma. It's a story about systemic oppression. It's history. I have a media ethics class. We could write about it. Anonymously at first. We have to." And there it was. The poison, leaping to the next generation. My sweet, idealistic granddaughter ready to torch the remains of our family's reputation on the pyre of public opinion. The war was not over. It had just found a new, much younger, and more dangerous general. And the terrifying question wasn't if she would act, but whether I had the right or the strength to stop her. "Sarah, no," I said, the words coming out as a desperate plea. My voice was stronger than I expected, laced with authority that made her pause at the attic door. "You can't." "Why?" she challenged, turning back to face me, the journal held like a shield.
Why should we protect him? He was a monster, Grandma. He tormented Great-Grandma. He stole from you. He covered up a death. The world should know who he really was. This isn't just our story. It's about holding powerful men accountable. I pushed myself up from the floor, my knees protesting, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. This was the moment I had feared. The righteous fire of youth ready to burn down everything in its path, not understanding that some ashes are too toxic to ever be cleansed. It's not about protecting him, Sarah. He's beyond that. It's about protecting us, I said, stepping toward her. You think you're exposing him, but you'll be exposing your great-uncle Bradford to a fresh wave of scrutiny. He's finally building a stable life. What do you think will happen when the world finds out his father didn't even believe he was his son? What will that do to him? I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by stubborn resolve. He's strong. He's survived worse. And Robert, I pressed, my voice softening, your great-uncle Robert, who built his entire identity on being the heir, the successor to the Vance legacy. You would shatter him completely. And for what? For a man who is already dead and buried? But the truth is a weapon, Sarah, and you are holding it by the blade. I interrupted, my patience fraying. I spent my entire life living with the consequences of secrets I didn't even know. I will not spend whatever time I have left dealing with the consequences of a truth unleashed without any thought for the carnage it will cause. I reached out and gently placed my hand on the journal. This was your great-grandmother's private pain, her humiliation. Do you really have the right to publish that to the world? To make her most private suffering into public spectacle? Tears welled in her eyes. So, we just do nothing? We let him win? No, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. We win by breaking the cycle. We win by being better. We win by protecting the family we have left, not by destroying its remnants for a moment of public vindication. I looked into her young, anguished face, and I saw myself reflected there. The burning need for justice, the belief that sunlight is the only disinfectant. Give me the journal, Sarah. Not to hide it, but to let me handle this. My way. The results of those tests, if they even still exist, are in your great-grandfather's old study, in Robert's house. Her eyes widened. The battle wasn't about a public blog post anymore. It had shifted, becoming something more intimate and far more dangerous. It was about crossing a threshold into the heart of the family's remaining fortress. Robert would never let you look for them, she breathed. Then we won't ask him, I said, the decision settling in my bones with a terrifying finality. The war was indeed not over. It had simply returned to its point of origin, my father's study, and this time, I wouldn't be searching for an envelope. I would be hunting for the foundational lie that could either finally liberate us or shatter us beyond repair. We're going to get into that study, and we're going to find those test results. But what we do with them after, that we decide together, as a family, not as journalists. Do you understand? Sarah looked from my determined face to the journal in her hands. Slowly, she nodded. The fire in her eyes, banked for now, replaced by a new, sober understanding. The mission had changed. We were no longer seeking exposure. We were seeking the final, terrible truth, whatever it might be. And we were going to steal it. The key to Robert's house felt like a shard of ice in my pocket. He'd given it to me years ago, for emergencies. I wondered if he'd consider this an emergency, or the ultimate betrayal. Sarah and I moved through the moonlit living room like ghosts, the silence so profound I could hear the frantic beating of my own heart. The study door was locked. My breath hitched. This was a new development. Robert had never locked it before. "Grandma?" Sarah whispered, her voice tight with panic. "What do we do?" A memory surfaced, sharp and clear. My father showing off a hideous brass lion statue to a business associate. "The key to the kingdom is in the lion's mouth," he joked, "if you can stomach reaching for it." I'd always thought he meant the key to his success. Now I understood. I reached for the statue on the hall table, my fingers trembling as I felt inside the cold, open mouth. My fingertips brushed against cold, serrated metal, the spare key. The lock turned with a soft click. The study smelled the same, leather and lies. We went straight to the bottom left drawer of the desk, the strong box. This time, there was no manila envelope, just a single, sealed, legal-sized document folder tucked beneath a false bottom I never knew existed. The tab was blank. With shaking hands, I opened it. Inside were 3 documents: DNA paternity test results, one for Robert, one for Bradford, and one for me. I scanned the summary lines, my eyes blurring with tears I refused to shed. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. It was the same for all 3 of us. We were his, unequivocally, biologically his. The truth was not some shocking revelation of a different father. The truth was far more cruel. He had known. He had always known we were his children. The tests were never about doubt. They were about domination, a final psychological weapon to hold over our mother, to make her feel vulnerable and accused in her own home. It was the ultimate act of control. Sarah sank into our father's worn leather chair, the fight gone from her. He knew all that pain, and he knew. I looked at my brother Robert standing in the doorway. He wasn't angry. He looked old and broken and tired. He must have heard us. He must have known we would come. "He showed them to me," Robert said, his voice hollow. "A year before he died." He laughed. He said it was his insurance policy, to make sure I always remembered who held the power. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a lifetime of regret. "I'm sorry, Ellie. I was a coward. I should have told you. I should have burned them." In that moment, the last of my anger toward him dissolved. He, too, had been a prisoner. We built a small fire in the garden pit behind the house. The 3 of us, Robert, Sarah, and I, watched as the pages containing our father's most insidious lie curled, blackened, and turned to ash, the embers rising into the night sky like freed spirits. Bradford never learned about the tests. Some truths are too poisonous to ever share. The Vance legacy would not be one of scandal or of a fractured bloodline. It would be the story of a mother's love found in her hidden journal. It would be the story of a brother finding redemption. It would be the story of a granddaughter who learned that some battles are fought quietly, not for glory, but for peace. The war was finally, truly over, not because we had slain all our demons, but because we had chosen, together, to stop feeding them. And in the warm, quiet glow of the dying embers, I felt my mother's presence, not as a ghost of sorrow, but as a whisper of approval. The chain was broken. At last.